It is located in Big Sur, California. It's in a very scenic spot. It's both a literary and cultural center. It highlights literature, music, art, and all things art, if you will. It's a great place, chock full of just great books and other wonderful things. And the people who work there are just fantastic. The executive director of the Henry Miller Library is Magnus Torin. He'll maybe be joining us at some point in time. Magnus is a fabulous guy. He's sailed around the world twice. He's extremely literate, but most of all, he's just a terrific person. And when you go to the library, you'll no doubt meet him. He's just a fabulous guy. If you are able, in the near future, to get down to the Henry Miller Library, I know it's hard to travel these days. It'll be well worth your time. It's just a terrific place. In the meantime, if you're so inclined, the Henry Miller Library will welcome your charitable donation. It is a nonprofit organization. If you go online to henrymiller.org, you'll not only have a great time looking at the site, there's also always, and it's frequently updated, all kinds of interesting information, interviews, book suggestions, online concerts, virtual concerts, all that kind of good stuff. And again, if you go to that site and you're so inclined, they would welcome your charitable donation during this difficult time. With that said, I'm going to get started by introducing our first poet, Dee Allen. Dee's latest book is, and I'll try to get it correct, Eloi Unici, which translates to Mother Earth in the Chalagi Nation language. It is just out this year. He's the author of prior collections, Boneyard, Stormwater, Unwritten Law, and Skeletal Black, Poems from Beneath the Poverty Line. His work has appeared broadly, an African-Italian performance poet based in Oakland, California. Dee has been active on the creative writing and spoken word tips since the early 1990s. Please give your attention now to Dee as I turn the center stage over to him. And with that, Laura.
Dee, are you able to unmute yourself? There we go. I just asked you to unmute. And then I'm trying to spotlight you. I think you need to turn on your camera before I can do that. Up, where'd you go? There we go.
Okay, now you can see my homely face on this, inside this little frame.
There you are.
There we go.
Before I go into my little set, I'm going to dedicate my portion of this program to the coordinator, Miss Laura Schulkind. Did I pronounce your name right?
Schulkind, but close enough.
Schulkind. Thank you.
School child.
Yeah, it's German.
Yiddish.
All right, Yiddish. I see you corrected. And the pieces I'm about to do today come out of my new book, Eloi Unici, Poems, 2013 to 2018. The book is separated into 3 different sections. The first poem comes out of the section entitled Harm to Nature, from pages 10 and 11. This is called Conundrum. As a twiggy little boy of 9, I was so curious about the bumblebees hovering over blood-red roses, flesh-pink roses, bushes filled with pale yellow honeysuckles that grew in my grandmother's yard. So curious when I reached out to touch one. Ah! That bumblebee stung me with its needle-like tail, leaving behind a mark, swollen red, painful, on the caramel brown of my arm. Never touched another one since. There were so many bumblebees back then, practically in swarms. Every spring, pollination time. Now I'm older, a man of 52, taller, darker skinned, close to chocolate than caramel. Still twiggy though. Another spring has arrived and something is missing from the big ecological picture. Absence leaves behind a mark, a conundrum. Where have all the bumblebees gone? I hear different styles of music, but no distinctive droning buzz fills my ears. I see all manners of insects fly in the air, but no visible sign of the little pollinators paying any visit to East Oakland's roses. Extinction leaves behind a mark, a conundrum. Who will produce honey when the bumblebees are gone? That poem was called Conundrum, my own personal rumination on the slow disappearance of bumblebees in the past 5 years. When I first wrote this poem back in 2015, there were at least a dozen bumblebees I would see at most. Now it is the year 2020. We're in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. And I would see one or no bumblebees at all. Blame that on a funny little thing called global warming or Roundup weed killer. The second poem comes out of the second portion of the book entitled Beauty of Nature. And this one is more of a biographical piece. From pages 28 and 29 in the book, this is called The Silversmith. It took a silversmith, a Chalagi silversmith, to give 7 clans, his tribe, a unique voice. In the early 20th century, the silversmith, the Chalagi silversmith, had found scattered by the wind snow-white leaves not seen on any bushes he knew. Curiosity drew the silversmith, the Chalagi silversmith, to closely examine snow-white leaves bearing unusual marks he couldn't read. Inspiration stirred the silversmith, the Chalagi silversmith, to avoid using the hammer, anvil, sheet metal flame in forging new items his tribe needed. Imitation drove the silversmith, the Chalagi silversmith, to pick up a feather dipped in ink and copy 26 English letters, designed 60 mo behind them. It took a silversmith, a Chalagi silversmith, to give 7 clans, his tribe, a unique voice, written on crisp, flat, snow-white leaves that talk back to the eyes. And that second poem was called The Silversmith, a biographical poem on the single greatest life achievement of one Sequoia, who single-handedly created the 86-letter Chalagi alphabet by imitating, at first, the 26 English letters from books that he's read that he called talking leaves, and then he improvised the rest. And what he did was single-handedly create America's first written indigenous language. Thanks, Sequoia, for that. And the next poem from the section of the book entitled Beauty of Nature. And this is also another bio poem and one of my personal favorites in the book. This is called Washaquone, from pages 24 and 25. Many who had hiked through Canadian wilderness a century ago took notice of a bird in flight, a rare one-deal Ojibwa called Washaquone, he who flies by night. At once a hunter, a guide, a trapper, a living made from the furs in his sight, a rare one-deal Ojibwa called Washaquone, he who flies by night. Into his forest lair he gave shelter to a pair of beavers and a female pony, beautiful, willful, contrite. A rare one-deal Ojibwa called Washaquone, he who flies by night. He recorded every caper on 2 pages of paper, turned articles and books. Thousands read his every insight. A rare one-deal Ojibwa called Washaquone, he who flies by night. He took bold strides to speak for trees and wildlives. Nature's preservation from devastation became his plight. A rare one-deal Ojibwa called Washaquone, he who flies by night. Then he traveled to an evening powwow where he'd shown native chiefs how. He embraced their ways, mastered their sacred dances by firelight. A rare Wendy Ojibwa called Washaquone, he who flies by night. In Canada and England, news is spread. One day at home, he was suddenly dead. His secret's out. The Red Indian was English and white. A rare Wendy Ojibwa called Washaquone, he who flew by night. But never mind the buckskins, the feather headdress, the moccasins, or false tales about his past, every slight. A rare Wendy Ojibwa called Washaquone, he who flew by night. His other steps were true after all. Preventing ecology's steady fall, what mattered was the nature of his fight. A rare Wendy Ojibwa called Washaquone, he who flew by night. That poem was called Washaquone, written on Canadian Aboriginal Day 2014. Written in memory of Archibald Delaney, better known as Grey Owl, he who flies by night. Canada's very first environmentalist. He started out as a hunter, a trapper, and a guide. But after an incident involving a beaver caught in a trap, he vowed to change his ways and decided to speak out in favor of animal life, the lives of the trees, the entire environment in the Great White North. And if you will allow me to use the screen share feature, I will show you a picture of the real Washaquone.
Give me a second here and let me see if I can do that fairly quickly. I've got to find here we go. Okay, I've got to find you, Dee.
Okay, just say when.
Okay, you should be able to do it now.
Host disabled, participant screen sharing. Oh well. Got to stay within the 15-minute time limit. And the last.
The problem is I can't do it and spotlight you at the same time. I think that's what caused that to happen. Yeah.
Okay, live and learn. And the last two poems happen to come from the third section of the book entitled Travels Through Nature. And these are all poems based on green places that I've traveled to. From page 44 and 45 in the book, this one is an ode to the home of California's largest, biggest trees. This is called Guardians. They stand watch over everything precious that thrived in moist shadows and passed beneath them. Coastal redwoods, towering, supremely thick, rust-colored specimens of wood with 12-inch bark, giant elders. Guardians of groves, at first glance intimidating looking, yet inviting, maintains a steady vigil 1,000 years or less. Some humans rightfully saw fit to preserve these ancient watchers of life. When they wandered through one of the groves, William and Elizabeth Kent witnessed still, unspoiled botanical beauty, vowed its protection from the logger saw's ripping touch, and gave it John Muir's name. Verdant patches of three-leaf clovers, sprawling coils of fern, tall, slender Douglas fir trees trying hard to imitate their mightier redwood cousins. Hungry squirrels scampered a dirt floor on a foraging trip, a craving for acorns, fallen or on a branch needs sating. Lean little trickle of water running down an extensive ditch toward Mount Tamalpais Way. Sorry masquerade for a full rushing creek. The steady march of hikers, boots and sneakers, treading new grooves into overworn trails, are offered protection by the guardians in return.
Thank you.
That poem was called Guardians, my little ode to Muir Woods here in the Bay Area, the home to the largest, the tallest, thickest, most colossal coastal redwoods you will ever see here in the Golden State. If you've never been to Muir Woods, after this coronavirus pandemic is over, take your lovers, take your friends, take your favorite family members if you must, and take a little trip out to Muir Woods in Mill Valley and check out these gigantic coastal redwood trees. And the last poem is a little personal. And it's a long one, so get your ears, your patience, and attention spans ready. From pages 55 through 59 in the book, this is called Sweat Lodge. Chololo Falls Campground, Tool River Yocut Reservation, Porterville, California, July 2006. Small tin cup full of water, tipped and poured over sacred fire, heated stones left scalding. Created condensation, heated up the lodge, solitary in the wilderness, near waterfall. Ceremonial site made from wooden framing and surrounding tarps and canvas. Here, there, we huddled in a circle in the darkness, practically returning to mommy's womb, parental safety, pre-birth. Sweating the weakness out of our pores, purifying ourselves beyond the hot, stifling black moment. My first sitting in a sweat lodge was everything I thought it would be. Chants, meditations, clouds of steam, extreme heat, dry, oppressive, humid as Atlanta summers. Exhaustion climate I do not miss. Rapid moisture arisen from my bare. Neck, shoulders, back, chest, arms, legs, bare feet, even soaked the white towel wrapped around my black waist. Clouds of steam, extreme heat, full body perspiration forced me to remember my 30th birthday that evening, March 3rd, 1998, my last taste of alcohol whilst hanging out with an old friend between two taverns, my last fling as a social drinker, Heineken Dark, Rolling Rock, Jägermeister shots, blank spot in my memory, and then the morning after, in my own bedroom. Never knew how I got in there. Slowly waking, stomach churned, nauseous feeling, legs weakened, turned to crawling, not walking, back and forth between the bed and the toilet. Release of bile from my mouth to bowls hollow had me scared to eat or drink anything that day. My worst hangover superseded others past. Silent vow from inner skull, no more consuming alcohol. That long, vexing day of my own body staging its mutiny against me was the terminus of a weekend recreational rite that began in my late teens. Any beer, any ounce of liquor to impress other metalheads and punk rockers at parties. Anything to avoid the unwanted label of coward. American Indian tradition says we must heal and cleanse ourselves for closeness with our Creator. And that's where the lodge comes in. Sometimes it's good to sweat. And that last poem was called Sweat Lodge, about my very first Native American purification ritual in the summer of 2006. I went out there from San Francisco and traveled along with some friends from Modesto to take part in this program called Indians in Sobriety, the 20th annual edition. And one of the featured events that they had within this event was a Native American sweat lodge. I sat in a circle with other curious souls, sweating everything out of myself in the darkness. And then suddenly this memory I thought I'd forgotten all about comes out of nowhere. The memory of my last social drinking and the worst hangover I ever had. But there's a bright spot to the story. That hangover enabled me to stop drinking completely. And because of it, I am 22 years clean and sober. And if I'd kept on drinking, I wouldn't have come out with this book. Eloy Onichi, now available from Conviction to Change Publishing. From this computer mic to your ears, I'm Dee Allen. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you, Dee. That was absolutely terrific. I really enjoyed it. I love the learning that you share in your poems. Take us deep into subjects that most of us may not be familiar with, especially about the indigenous people that you write about in the US and Canada. I also love the musical chant-like quality of your writing. All kinds of slant rhymes in there, and just you're just moves from one line to the next line. I can see why you'd be a terrific performance poet as well. Thank you again. Our next poet is Lucy Lang Day. She is the author of 7 full-length poetry collections and 4 chapbooks. Her latest collection is Birds of San Pancho and Other Poems of Place. Her many honors include the Blue Light Poetry Prize, 2 Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Awards, the Joseph Henry Jackson Award, and 11 Pushcart Prize nominations. She's the founder and publisher of Scarlet Tanager Books, impressive academic credentials. She received her MA in English and MFA in creative writing from San Francisco State. She also has a BA in biological sciences, an MA in zoology, and a PhD in science mathematics education at UC Berkeley. And if that isn't enough to intimidate us all. Anyway, please, I'll now give the stage to Lucy Lang Day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to be reading from my new book, Birds of San Pancho and Other Poems of Place. This book just came out on November 1st from Blue Light Press. The book is divided into 2 sections. The first section is called Foreigner, and all of the poems in that first section take place in various countries of Latin America and Europe. And the second section is called Between the Two Shining Seas, and all of the poems in the second section take part in the US. So I'm going to start out by reading a few poems from the first section, and I'll start with the very first poem in the book. This is called It Matters, and it takes place in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. It matters that the casa rises orange as the dawn sky under cloud and blue. Impatiens, white, red, pink, spilling from terracotta pots along the balustrade. That feathery jacaranda leaves flutter and the bells of La Paraquia wake us at 6 a.m. each morning. That the gnarled woman begging on the street was once young and agile, and that someone give her a few pesos when she reaches out from the sidewalk by the bank in the sticky heat of late afternoon. That even here I remember my father's laugh and the weight of my mother's disappointments, while les étoiles, las estrellas, the stars, burn through the sky's dark cloth, no matter what I call them. That prickly pear cacti are delicious, although the Big Bang defies common sense and intuition. And earth and sea offer their riches freely to the boy playing with a stick outside La Casa Rosada. That he never have to hold a gun and the bells always reach his ears, pulsing through clear morning air. And next, I'll read the title poem from the book, Birds of San Pancho. This poem obviously takes place in San Pancho, which is a town in the state of Nayarit, Mexico. And on the cover of the book is a great kiskadee, and a great kiskadee appears immediately in this poem. Birds of San Pancho. A great kiskadee sits on the casa wall, belting its exuberant song above the dusty cobblestone street. The bird is masked like a raccoon, its breast yellow as the butterflies that flit amid hibiscus and bougainvillea. Far from the casa, where palms and maya nut trees grow lushly, a yellow-winged cacique waits in the paperbark tree, the lemony underside of its long tail cascading like silk. It surveys the scene, ignoring the golden-cheeked woodpecker, streak-backed oriole flycatchers, and scrub euphonia sharing the selva. Farther down the dirt road, where red ants live inside acacia thorns, a pale cow wanders alone, snubbing the fat chachalacas, singing chachalaka as I pass by. It seems the birds are out to cheer me, though I know food and mates are what they're after. A whole flock of orange-fronted parakeets feasts on berries overhead. Later, at the lagoon, a great blue heron, a little blue heron, a green heron, a night heron, 2 great egrets, 8 snowy egrets, and 20 cattle egrets gather while brown pelicans dive for fish and the sun's bright disk sinks into the sea. When it disappears, the egrets rise in groups and pairs to settle in 2 coconut palms for the night. Oh, to sit up there too, safe, having eaten my fill, with folded wings, watching over creation. And the next poem is called Hologram. In my dream, my daughter shimmered on stage as a hologram, giving a lecture on sexual dysfunction for her fellow marriage and family therapists. They nodded and laughed at all the right times. I wanted to tell them she was such a terrific speaker, so witty and animated, because she'd studied dramatic art. I knew that she knew she had cancer, but expected to live. Only I knew she was already dead. No way would I tell her and break her heart. She was still my baby, who'd bounced in time to the music of the Beatles, my mischievous toddler, my girl who sang on stage at Fairyland at 5. Waking to the sea's murmur at Casa Obelisco in San Pancho, Mexico, in my room with the cool tile floor and a fan turning softly overhead, I understood this was what had happened. Through all the long months of chemo, R-CHOP, rice, RDHAP, GEMAX, PET scans, and radiation treatments, both of us snubbed death, the hated stranger grinning smugly, waiting so near. Even as the tissues around her lungs filled with fluid from the tumor and her breathing grew labored, I held her hand and told her over and over, hang on to hope, Leanna. You can still get better, as though my love could scratch a diamond or hold back the night. And next, I'll read a poem that takes place in southern France. This is called Child's Grave and Finery, and I think you'll see why I felt great empathy for the family that lost this child. A 10,000-year-old grave of a child about 3 years old, covered with ochre dust and marked with 3 stones, nestled in a rock shelter under an overhanging cliff in southern France. More than 1,500 beads carefully carved from seashells and animal teeth adorned his neck, wrists, elbows, ankles, and knees. Marks inside the beads show a needle passed through them. They were sewn onto clothes that disintegrated long ago. Scratches and nicks on the outside imply the child wore these beaded clothes when he was playing. Anthropologists say this finery must signify hereditary social status. But maybe he was an only child whose grandmother polished the beads and sewed them onto his clothes while his father hunted and his mother gathered berries, the way a grandmother today might knit or crochet a sweater or blanket. Or maybe his parents were so broken by his death that they sewed all their own beads onto his burial clothes. So anyone finding his grave would know how much he mattered. So I saw this child's skeleton and the beads at the Museum of Prehistory in France, and I wept when I saw that and read about it. Now I'm going to move ahead to the second section of the book, between the two shining seas, and read some poems that take place in California. The first one is called Watching the Grebes, and it takes place at Clear Lake, and this is a sonnet. A taut blue sky is stretched above the lake, which glitters like a rippling field of stars in early sun. Two western grebes take a morning swim, but they don't go far before they plunge. When they emerge, beaks filled with weeds, they stand. It's time to dance. Long necks held high, black crests and white cheeks side by side. They glide as though on skis, advance toward us. Standing on the balcony, we see the shining wake they leave behind. My love, I'd like to be as easy as the grebes, who seem content to find a dancing partner as the new day starts, a dark-winged bird that knows the steps by heart. And the next poem is called I Am Amazed, and this is dedicated to Susan Duhon Felix, the art ambassador of Berkeley, who signs all of her correspondence, Stay Amazed. I am amazed by the Arches cluster, the most crowded place in the Milky Way, jam-packed with stars, 25,000 light years from Earth in Sagittarius. By Earth whirling through space, the only planet known to have free oxygen, liquid water, whales, wallabies, and redwood forests. By a single redwood tree, 350 feet tall and 10 feet in diameter, standing above the Pacific since Herod was exiled to Gaul. By a single redwood needle, flat, with two silvery bands on its underside and inner machinery endlessly churning out ATP. By a molecule of ATP which carries energy in all the cells of people and trees, a currency required for love and breathing. By two children, a boy and a girl playing under the tree, who spot a speckled woodpecker with a red patch on its head, tapping the bark, igniting a blaze of amazement. And I'll just read two more poems, and they both take place in my house. The first one is called Toys in My House. On the stereo cabinet in the living room, a black metal steam engine my grandfather, who came to California from Paterson, New Jersey by train, played with in the 1880s when women wore bustles and every year more and more tracks were laid. 84 glass marbles in multicolored swirling shades in a handmade beige cotton sack on which my dad neatly printed his initials, RAL, before the stock market crash, when the Charleston was the rage. Perched on a closet shelf, the Keystone televiewer I used to see naked children in 3D outside their tree-like huts in the Belgian Congo, back when blondes were called dumb and people still did the jitterbug. The Candyland game, whose plastic gingerbread people my daughter Leanna pushed through the lollipop woods when Tricky Dick was president, and hippies danced to the dead, high on mushrooms or weed. A doll, once Swan Lake Barbie, with long blonde tresses, but who got tattoos and short spiky hair, purple, pink, and green, thanks to my daughter Tamarind, when Pac-Man was new and Michael Jackson ruled MTV. Buzz Lightyear, waiting for someone new to come along, flip up his helmet and hear him say, "To infinity and beyond," now that my grandson Brandon, almost 12, would rather play Jetpack Joyride on his iPod. The miniature horse ranch set with white, chestnut, gray, and tan steeds whose jockeys ride them over hurdles in the hands of my granddaughters, Autumn and Sabine, who still are masters of make-believe. A plastic car that plays the Mickey Mouse Club song for Devlin, my younger grandson, who scoots around the living room, unaware that the world will change, just glad to toot the horn today. And my last poem is called After Catastrophe. And I wrote this 4 years ago. It was the first poem that I wrote after Trump was elected president. After catastrophe. Go to sleep. You need your dreams as much as ever, maybe more. When you wake, make yourself a cup of coffee. Conscientious objector, certified fair trade and organic, a blend of Guatemalan, Ethiopian, and Sumatran beans. Do not avoid the newspaper, no matter how upsetting. You need to know what's going on. Remember that the redwood tree is still alive, even though it has fungal cankers, and you must keep pruning away infected branches. So too with society, which suffers from fear and hatred, ancient diseases that must continually be cut away. Give the plants on your deck some water. The geranium, fuchsia, and impatiens are still blooming, even though it's nearly winter. Find solace in their resilience, then take your grandchildren to a movie, The Eagle Huntress, to remind them and yourself that the earth is gorgeous, even when cold and dangerous, that societies can evolve and change, allowing a young girl in Mongolia to take on a role once filled only by men. Think about that girl with an eagle perched on her arm and ask yourself what you can do to ensure that spring will come again with all the stars in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy. That was terrific. It's a joy to be in the presence of, first of all, those birds. I could see them flying around my room here. Kind of an aviary of international scope, but it was really lovely. And the poems about your daughter and the child buried with the beaded garment is so powerful. And interesting how you take us first through these lush places in Mexico, and now we end up in your house. Wonderful.
Right.
Thank you very much.
you.
Thank you so much. Our next poet is Barbara Jane Reyes. Barbara Jane is her most recent collection is Letters to a Young Brown Girl from Boa Editions this year. Barbara Jane was born in Manila, Philippines, and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. Previous collections, Gravities of Center, Poeta on San Francisco, James Laughlin Award winner, and Daiwata, a Global Filipino Literary Award for Poetry winner. She's an Andrew W. Mellon Foundation Fellow, and she teaches at the University of San Francisco's Uchenga Philippine Studies program. I now am thrilled to turn the stage over to Barbara Jane.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to all the poets and to Laura. And thank you folks for coming and hanging out with us today on Zoom. As Peter said, this is my latest book, Letters to a Young Brown Girl, and I always love to shout out the artist who created this beautiful image. Her name is Maria Dumlau, and she is based in Philadelphia. And obviously what you see here is a beautiful young girl with enormous bat wings. And sometimes I like to think that that is a nice poetic reflection of my personality. So this book is indeed comprised of letters to young brown girls, and I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into them. Squeeze your hand into a fist. Now loosen just a bit. They say that is the heart, heat, fiber, sugar. Cut around its core, score and invert. Take your teeth to its golden flesh and bite. They say this is the heart of a lovely girl. In these stories, there is always a girl, lovely as that dream just before waking. There is always a girl whose dainty feet make light where she toe taps the earth so soft. Elders tell her patience will saint her, and so she waits. There is always heartbreak, chambers washed in longing, pulsing dark inside the body. She waits. They say she waited with a waning moon until dawn. She waited. Press your index finger and your tall finger into the underside of your jawbone and count. Back in the day, we burned white sage. We filled our small spaces with lavender and sunlight. We were such love-thirsty brown girls, aching, unslaked. How do you fill a vessel of want? Back in the day, always on the edges, looking into others' tidy white lives. When we subsisted on cheap tea and nicotine. When our belongings, mostly poem-filled notebooks, fit neat into milk crates. Back in the day, we wished to be so beautiful in our darkness. We occupied nowhere, stared into spaces we didn't think we'd belong. We walked if we didn't have bus fare. If you look at our lives back in the day, you will see such sad girls, so much unmet grace. We won't hold our tongues fast. We won't unforget all we've been made to stuff back into our darkest places and so shut. We know the heart heals with time, and that bruises heal too. We know how to leave a boy who hurts with words or fists. We know how to ghost a boy who doesn't even deserve our ghost. We know how to change numbers and locks, that sometimes behind a bolted door, the only thing that will keep us company is a good record collection and a fire. We remember not to say sorry. We know some boys do not deserve a proper goodbye. There is always a brown girl who knows exactly how and when to open up the walls and disappear. We know this is easy as breathing on a cool day. We know how to pluck music from the air and how to pluck away grays. We know how to call for the ocean to rise, cold, salt, and tide, how to bury and how to build fire. We know we are that ocean. We know how to strip away sound, pulse, and subside. From barely a sigh, we can hold a pure note high. We know that to be a brown girl is to call to the ocean, is to call to the self, is to know you have to find a way. I'm skipping ahead here. Let's see. Sister, doesn't your face hurt from smiling all the time? So does mine. When we are supposed to blossom and smile, let's wail low instead. We'll wail so low and so long. Under the breath, so quiet, we'll spell. We are so tiny to their eyes. Time will move and time will push us all along, and they will forget we are there as speck, as germ, as lurking, as dark. We are a tinted tongue of tiny heat. If you want to know how to break the big, sometimes we are the spore, and sometimes, sister, yes, we are the spark. Okay. Still flipping around here. Here we go. Dear brown girl, after all this, you still ask me how it is I arrived at the poem. I want to tell you about my rounded, looping penmanship in berry-scented ink. I want to tell you about typing my words on an old typewriter, pushing its carriage return, poems with no correction tape. I want to tell you about drafts upon handwritten drafts, about the smell and feel of so much cream and marbled Florentine paper, about cutting class and taking the afternoon to shop for handcrafted notebooks and writing implements. I want to tell you about my pink inked lowercase i's dotted with chubby hearts. I held so much unrequited sweetness. I want to say I was waiting, but I don't know what I was waiting for. So much ache, so much breaking. I want to say so much about silencing and time. Dear brown girl, what is there to fear in your silence? When you do not speak, do you hear your own footfalls, your breath, your measured gait? Can you feel tension and give of earth with every step? Can you feel how terrain changes underfoot? What does this tell you about the sprawl and tangle of roots? About seeds that open only when fire comes? What happens when you pay attention? What happens when you step outside of words? What do you learn about heartbeat? Can you hear the single leaf fall to the soil? And when there is rustle through limbs, through hollowed trunks, do you know what living thing moves into the underbrush? Can you see its tracks? Can you catch its scent? If you know how to listen, there is an entire language of water and earth, wings and husks and legs, heat and birth. What do you find when you sit with yourself inside your silence? And then I think maybe this will be my last poem. Watch me as I take a heart, she says. Barehanded, pull apart the fibers and make sure to catch the juice. My unwed aunties taught me how to undress a fresh heart. First, peel away the rough husk. This is not work for tender hands. Take care not to touch its itchy sap. The heart is fragrant and it is durable. You may brine a heart or you may braise a heart. You will see how a heart softens. You may mince, spice, and serve a well-seasoned heart. Do not pluck it unripe. Wait until it wants to open. And that's all I have for you folks today. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you. That was really fabulous. I haven't read the book yet, but I just love the concept of the book. It's just fabulous. I just love how it's immersed in the personal, but it's expanded obviously to the community that you're writing, and certainly well beyond that, because God knows I'm not a young brown girl, but I was certainly drawn into the poems, kind of reiterating what your line says. Poetry fills a vessel of want, and it often does, so often. Well, thank you so much. We're now going to turn our attention to our final reader, George Bilgere. And I know a little bit about George. I think I've known George or George's work for about, I want to guess, 15 years. It could be longer. We first met, I was in a bookstore just looking titles and names I didn't know. And I came across a couple of George's, I think it was his first 2 books. And I loved them so much that I did what every poet would do. I wrote him a fan letter. And anyway, since that time, I've followed George's work through the years. He's actually authored 7 poetry collections, the latest being Blood Pages from the University of Pittsburgh Press. He has received numerous grants and awards from, among others, the National Endowment for the Arts, Pushcart, and the Fulbright Foundation. He makes frequent appearances on Garrison Keillor's The Writer's Almanac and Ted Kuzer's American Life and Poetry. He's also the host of a weekly radio show in Cleveland called Wordplay. I'm delighted to now turn the stage over to George Bilgere.
Wow. Thanks, Peter. And thanks for having me on this Zoomcast. I'm coming to you from sort of the center of art and culture in the world. And that is Cleveland, Ohio, where it's a beautiful, stormy, blustery night. So at any moment I feel like either my power will go out or a tree will fall on the house. If that happens, go out, have a glass of wine, have a nice evening, and I hope I'll be fine. I want to start tonight by reading a poem. I'm like the world's oldest, relatively new dad. I have 2 kids who are 4 and 7, 2 little boys. And one of the, probably the most remarkable experience that can happen to anyone is to witness the birth of a child. And I've done that a couple of times now. And it's just the most astonishing thing you can imagine, standing in the room. I mean, my wife can't really see it. I mean, she's, sort of swaddled in sheets and dealing with all kinds of other complications. I can just stand there and watch. And it's the most astounding thing to me, but not necessarily to everyone else in that room. And in a sense, that's what this poem is about. The poem is called Push, and it's from this book called Blood Pages, with that weird looking, wonderful bird on it. It's about to eat an equally strange looking bug. Here's the poem, Push. I'm trying to look as if I'm suffering. I have this anguished expression on my face, but it's wasted since I'm wearing a surgical mask. And anyway, the focus here is really on my wife, and the doctor is right there between her legs, and he's shouting, push! And my wife is doing this astounding thing. She's pushing yet another human being into the world, a world that so far seems to be pushing back, and the baby's heartbeat is down to 90. So the doc says, I think maybe one more try, then we do the cesarean. So things in the room really are a bit tense. It's definitely a moment that demands a lot of attention, and my wife is gathering whatever shreds of strength remain in the shaking, exhausted sleeve of flesh her body has become, the blood and sweat and fluids everywhere, and this is it. When I hear the attending nurse standing just behind me saying to this guy in scrubs standing next to her, I think he's the anesthesiologist's assistant, well, just because Karen says she has a boyfriend doesn't necessarily mean she won't go out with you. And the guy says, his voice rising because my wife really is screaming quite loudly at this point, yeah, okay, I guess I should give it a try. I mean, what's the worst that can happen other than getting shot down and looking like a total fool? And the nurse says, as the doctor is shouting, push! Yeah, but hasn't it been like a long dry spell for you? Aren't you getting a little desperate here? And the guy laughs, and my wife screams again, and the doctor says, yes! And into the world comes the bloody head, followed by the naked, lovely, bloody little boy, insanely ill-prepared for any of this. And I guess the guy actually is going to ask Karen out. And I say, go for it. All right. Yeah, I mean, you watch babies get born all day. Even that gets pretty darn boring, I guess. So here's a poem about, you know, the universal theme of all poets who are getting older, and that is getting older. The poem is called, here's something I find a bit strange. Have you noticed when you go to these modern young people, when you go to cafes or restaurants, that is back when you could do it in those pre-COVID times, you'll ask someone if maybe they can bring you, you know, another order of French fries or another Coke. And the answer is always, no problem. And I just find that a strange answer. Like, they feel like, yeah, you're inconveniencing me, but I'm not going to let you know that. Anyway, the name of this poem, this is a poem about aging, and the name of the poem is No Problem. I sit here aging at the street side cafe, giving off the sickly yellow smoke of decay, while people walk by pretending not to notice, glancing away into the distance or down at their phones, doing their best out of politeness or shock to ignore me sitting here aging. And I don't blame them. It's hard to watch. And now the waitress in her burning beauty, her lustrous, incandescent womanhood, walks up to me in a radiant cloud of youth and asks if I want another iced latte macchiato. But I'm aging so fast, I'm racing so quickly through time, I can barely hear her. And furthermore, I know that what she really wants to say is, your aging is kind of gross, kind of a turnoff. Maybe you could go do it somewhere else where it doesn't frighten the customers. And besides, it's not like there's anything I can do about it. And as I sit here with my skin peeling off and crumpling up like toilet paper, and my hair falling out on the table, and my teeth rotting, and my bones turning to glass, and all my organs drowning in the sludge of age, I croak to her as she floats in the cool, creamy oasis of her youthful lustrousness. I do manage to croak, yeah, another iced latte macchiato would be great. And from 90 million light years away, from the beautiful, bountiful, burning galaxy of her late teens, she says to the fast decaying, maybe starting to smell bad, just about to be covered with flies, old leathery carcass, I'm becoming no problem. Except that actually there is a problem. So, God, one of the things that really killed us this summer during the plague, the virus, you know, we've got these two kids, was not being able to go to our public pool, where we basically spend the whole summer ordinarily. So this poem that I'm about to read to you was written a year ago last summer. And the poem takes place at our local public pool here in Cleveland. It's called Cumberland Pool. And the poem is about the fact that, you go through life and you work hard and you pay your taxes and you show up on time and you build up your bank account and you sort of feel at a certain point like, maybe I've made something of myself. But that ego is so fragile, it's so delicate, it can be shattered so easily. And this is a poem about the fragility of the aging ego. It's set at the pool, it's called Horseplay. I am floating in the public pool, an older guy who has achieved much, including a mortgage, 2 children, and health insurance, including dental. I have a Premier Rewards Gold card from American Express, and my car is large. I have traveled to Finland. In addition, I once met Toni Morrison at a book signing and made some remarks she found extremely interesting. And last month, I was the subject of a local news story called Recyclers, Neighbors Who Care. In short, I am not someone you would take lightly. But when I begin to playfully splash my wife, the teenage lifeguard raises her megaphone and calls down from her throne, "No horseplay in the pool." And suddenly, I am 12 again, a pale worm at the feet of a blonde and suntanned goddess. And I just wish my mom would come pick me up. Here's a poem called Polar Bear. A father died heroically in some Alaskan park while trying to save his kids from a polar bear. Long ago, when his mother gave birth one afternoon in Barstow, California, could anyone have prophesied, as in an old myth, that the baby crying at her breast would one day be killed and partially eaten by a polar bear? Has anyone from Barstow, California, been killed and partially eaten by a polar bear? Yet her son was. He looked up from making camp, pitching the tent, or lighting his Coleman stove, and there it was, white and immense, his fate. And he died heroically and was partially eaten. Of course, the bear had to be killed. The rangers shot it, which makes sense. You can't have polar bears running around in the wilderness. The wilderness is a place for dads and kids and Coleman stoves. Polar bears just kind of ruin the whole thing. As for the bear, it didn't die heroically. It just got shot and fell over and was sent to a lab for testing. So I keep mentioning this plague we're in. Just recently, Knopf brought out this book, this anthology, edited by Alice Quinn. It's got a great cover, that wonderful yellow-clad bicyclist. And the anthology is all about the plague. It's all about the COVID virus. It's called Together in a Sudden Strangeness. And Alice Quinn invited a bunch of people to write poems about the COVID virus and life under the virus. So I wrote this poem called FaceTime in COVID Time. And the beginning of the poem features some of the dullest dialogue ever written in contemporary poetry, written by me. My wife and I sit out on the sun deck with our coffee every morning. "Do you want to grill tonight?" she asks, "or should I make something?" And if she cooked something last night, I'll say, you cooked something last night, so why don't I grill? And if she cooked something last night, I'll say, you cooked something last night, why don't I grill? And if I grilled last night, I'll say, I grilled last night, so why don't you cook something? And this conversation makes sense and is reassuring. Meanwhile, a coyote trotted down our boring little suburban street yesterday, right here in Cleveland Heights, like he owned the place. And I read that monkeys are ransacking shops in India, and jackals are wandering the streets of Tel Aviv, and water buffalo are just kind of standing around on the empty highways of New Delhi. While in the closed down Tokyo aquarium, these tiny eels, garden eels they're called, are forgetting what we look like. The aquarium keepers are worried that the eels are getting lonely, so they've hung iPods on the tanks, and they ask on their website, could you please show your face to the eels from your home? And of course, everyone is phoning the eels, which makes sense and is reassuring. The sky is so blue, the starlings can't bear to come down. The seas are so quiet that the whales, for once, can hear themselves thinking. And as I stand in my driveway tonight grilling, I feel grateful to the eels. How nice of them to miss us after all we've done. Such magnanimity in a beast so small. I decide to give them a call. I'm going to read one more poem tonight. Thanks for putting up with me. This is a poem that has to do with the fact that given the fact that we're all scanning news 24/7 on the computer and we have this constant overload of mostly bad news, what do we do about it? How do we react? And the poem is called Pancake Dilemma. And it was written right here at this very table where I'm sitting. Pancake Dilemma. Another subway station blows up in Europe. It's right there on the front page. And I'm about to pour some syrup on my pancakes, but perhaps I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I should just put the syrup down out of respect for the victims and their families. Yet, who is there to witness my sacrifice, my gesture of solidarity, however small, with the international community? My wife is playing with my son in the living room. I'm at the table by myself, and I could just go ahead and pour the syrup and smear on some butter and think compassionately about the victims while eating the pancakes while they're hot. No one will benefit from my eating cold pancakes. Instead, I call out to my wife from the dining room, another subway blew up in Europe. They think it's terrorists. But she doesn't hear me. The TV's turned up for Paw Patrol. So I just sit here quietly for a moment, then start eating the pancakes, trying not to enjoy them too much. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, George. Always a pleasure. Poems are always, every time I read one of your poems, I just have to smile ear to ear. And it's twofold, not only because they're humorous, but it really strikes all of us and how we deal with our everyday lives and all the little contradictions that having to live with the news and get on with our lives and feel guilty about whether we should feel guilty about having the pancakes in front of us. Reminds me when my own parents used to always talk about the kids starving in Europe when I didn't want to eat my green beans or whatever it was. Anyway, that's our presentation for today. I want to thank all our poets for an absolutely terrific job. Dee and Lucy, Barbara Jane, and George. I hope you'll join us next month again, December 20th, just before Christmas, but we know you won't be out Christmas shopping. So we know you'll be in your homes, and we'll provide a great roster of poets to entertain you. So thanks again to everyone, especially our readers, and Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, signing off.
Oh, I was on mute. Anyway, thanks so much for everyone. If I guess everyone has gone off now. I was going to